Welcome everyone, thank you for joining me for another pre-release guide. We have a lot to cover. The new set is Aetherdrift. There aren't too many new mechanics in this set, but there are a lot of complexities that will make for interesting gameplay. I will be participating in the streamer event over on Arena on February 5th. Starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be over on my Twitch account, streaming it live. Thank you, Wizards, for putting on this event and inviting me. This time around, they invited the Pro Tour players as well, who are going to be playing in the Aetherdrift Pro Tour. So, good competition, should be great games. I'll be mainly doing sealed, a little bit of draft as well, but it will be a good opportunity to see the set in action before you go to your pre-release and be able to ask questions. And, well, we can see what combos work out and what doesn't, what's a good strategy and what strategies are falling a bit flat. So, in addition to watching this guide, I do encourage you to pop over and watch the stream as well. But for now, let's jump into the key mechanics and start breaking down this set. The first new mechanic is speed. It starts with the new keyword ability, Start Your Engines. When you play a card with Start Your Engines and it enters the battlefield, your speed will become 1. This happens as a state-based action. So players can't respond after the permanent has entered, but before your speed becomes 1. Once you have speed 1 or greater, there's a new triggered ability that can occur during the game. That ability is whenever one or more opponents lose life during your turn, if your speed is less than 4, your speed will increase by 1. This ability triggers only once each turn. Once your speed reaches 4, you have max speed. It can't increase any higher than 4. Many cards that have Start Your Engines will also have abilities that care about you having max speed. Once you have max speed, abilities that state max speed are then unlocked and can become active or activated. One of the things that isn't very clear about speed that I want to clarify is that if you play a permanent that says Start Your Engines and you get speed 1 from that, can you go to speed 2 in the exact same turn if you deal damage? The answer is yes, if you deal damage after starting your engines. This is why a card like Gastral Thrillseeker is so good. It not only starts your engines, but it also takes you to speed 2 just by playing the card. The other new keyword ability is Exhaust. Exhaust is a keyword ability that represents a special kind of activated ability. You can only activate this ability once. Exhaust abilities can be activated anytime you can activate a normal ability. If an exhaust ability of a permanent is activated, and then that permanent leaves the battlefield and then returns to the battlefield, it becomes a new object. So the exhaust ability can be activated again. If an ability triggers whenever you activate an exhaust ability, that ability resolves before the exhaust ability resolves. There's also one special card in the format that tells you can activate exhaust abilities as if they haven't been activated. That is another way around this, but otherwise, it's pretty much a one and done ability. Cycling is returning as a keyword. Underestimate it at your own peril. You pay the cycling cost, you discard the card, and you draw a card. This can be done at instant speed. It's a very powerful move, and I think in this set, it will really make a huge impact on the play. Because when you have creatures that can get +1 counters from discarding and drawing cards, when you have buffs that get triggered off of that, all of a sudden, every single cycling card can become a combat trick in addition to being able to refuel your hand or fuel your graveyard or turbocharge your graveyard. So I think in terms of cycling, there's a lot to be gained here, and be careful. Like, there's a lot of cool combos. Cycling's always good, but in this set, I think in particular, it's going to be very good. I also just want to quickly touch on the fact there's a lot of mounts and vehicles in this set as well, particularly the vehicles, in that every single color has vehicles, and a lot of the vehicles are printed with ETBs that really act as you would normally see on other types of cards like enchantments or instants, and they're very strong ETB abilities. So not only are you getting what you're initially paying for just from the ETB alone, but then you have this like vehicle sitting on the battlefield afterwards, and that can be a very powerful piece to either utilize as a bigger creature later from crewing it, or maybe you sacrifice it for another payout. But the point is that I think the vehicles in general are going to play quite well because they have good ETBs or good static abilities attached to them, which means that the removal that targets artifacts specifically gets quite a bit better in the set as well. So, for example, Broken Wings is a card that in a lot of sets is borderline never main deckable, but in this set I think Broken Wings is absolutely main deckable, especially in sealed. Sky Crash is just a great card because not only does it hit up the cycle benefits that we were talking about, but I do think you are going to quite often have an artifact to destroy. Not to mention both of those are at instant speed, so once they crew a vehicle, not only do they have the expense of their creatures being tapped, but then you kind of blew them out because you destroyed the vehicle in addition to. So just some nice removal tempo plays to consider as you comb through the set. There are some other mechanics in this set, but I just don't feel like I need to go over them. They're either really recent or they're so few and far between that if you have any questions about any of the other mechanics you run across, feel free to leave it in the comments and I will answer it there. Let's jump into our color analysis. I like to go into each individual color first and then talk about the color pairings afterwards. Starting with white. White has a nice low curve out with really cool ways to be able to buff up and make your creatures or vehicles larger. Heavy focus on mounts, heavy focus on vehicles, heavy focus on artifacts. It has some really cool end game top end cards that you can build around. There are some cool combos you can do with cycling within white. Tune Up especially is quite the recursion card. And of course white has the board wipe that's always awkward, but this one has cycling, so it's a little bit less awkward because of that. In addition to mounts and vehicles, you can go for an artifact only build. There are quite a few artifact payouts in white, and there are some cheap and expensive artifacts to go along that curve as well if you wanted to go for pretty much an exclusive artifact build. There are a few cards that care about start your engines, but certainly not as many as some of the other colors. There are some colorless artifacts that obviously go very well with white, especially rover blades. And white as a whole gives you a pretty good set of combat tricks, protection spells, exile target creature vehicle, destroy target creature vehicle spells. So some good control, some good ways to pump up your board, especially in mounts and vehicles, and some nice payouts for having artifacts. Let's move on to blue. I think blue has incredible value in this set and some really fun build-arounds. Specifically, like Stock Up just really grabs me as a card that is kind of insane. Being able to look at 5 cards and then just choose 2 of them to put in your hand is pretty incredible for 3 mana. Transit Mage as well, being able to be a 2/2 for 3 mana and then also go and get an artifact of your choice from the library that has mana value 4 or 5. Put it into your hand is also just kind of insane value. There's some fun build-arounds involving max speed with blue. I think both of these cards are great. There's also like this cool mill out plan and with the self-mill from green, I actually think this is a little bit more feasible than it looks. You have to get the right cards, you have to have the right support to be able to make it, to turn 8, 9, or 10 to mill out your opponent, but these are very real win cons in sealed especially, so I wouldn't just write this off as a joke card. I actually think milling out your opponent is viable, but in everyday blue, so not like fun build around blue, I think most blue decks are going to be playing big creatures that are on the ground to stop up the ground, and then flyers. Lots of artifact flyers, just flyers in general. Blue's win con is definitely in the air, and flyers are sometimes just enough to win, right? Especially if you have a 0/8 on the board just laughing at your opponent as you chip in. So if you're playing blue in your sealed pool, I would definitely be looking for a flying win con. Blue has some nice tempo and control that's offered here. Anytime there's vehicles, tempo tends to do very well. So I'd expect tempo plays to play out well. There's also affinity for artifacts and some nice top-end win cons in blue to support your flyers that chip in and just kind of finish out the games. Blue cares about exhaust, technically, right? But I think in general it cares about drawing cards and artifacts more and flyers more. Let's dive into black. Black cares most about max speed, probably more than any other color. It's got some really great payouts and enablers to do so, with some nice pressure early and a good curve out. I think the Risen Necro Regent is maybe one of the better payouts for max speed. I mean, it just sits on the battlefield and pops out 2/2 zombies, right? It's pretty great. Same with like Hour of Victory. This is a 3-mana 2/2 zombie where once you get max speed, it's a demonic tutor attached to it. That's pretty incredible. I would be surprised if black didn't care about cycling, as cycling for graveyard recursion is just kind of like a natural combo. So the Chariot looks good. Has a few cycling cards and cards that care about cards in your graveyard. Lots of recursion, lots of value from being in your grave. So, look for surveils, look for ways to return creatures from the grave. Black really just wants to outvalue your opponent from the graveyard, pretty much as always. Black has some really cool build arounds in the rares and mythics. Certainly have my interest peaked. And of course it has the usual removal suite. I think there are some interesting combos with things like, Grim Bauble and the Hellish Side Swipe. But I mean, nothing here is that shocking in terms of like what it does. Momentum Breaker is probably going to play better than it reads. Be careful of your removal in black. If you have a choice between two cards like Spin Out and Siphon Fuel, I think Spin Out's much better just because some of the creatures in the set happen to be rather large, like a 0/8. But there's bigger creatures than that even. So like, I think -6, even though it reads as big, I don't know if it's big enough for this set. So be interested to see how that plays out. Moving on to red, I think red really enables aggression quite well in this set. There's a lot of early drop creatures that just attack in very well and are very difficult to block, or ones that you just don't want to block. So again, making it easier to max out your speed, or just whether it's a good value combat trick, or maybe it's just great exhaust abilities, right? Or just a really aggressively statted vanilla 4/1. I just feel like red has quite a good low curve out. So in sealed, that's can be good enough to win, right? There's this kind of cool like goblin build as well that I think is pretty interesting, and that build branches between max speed and exhaust payouts. So I think there's quite a bit of versatility in red that's kind of hidden in there. Artifact recursion even, and some pretty fun, win cons at the end of the game. I don't think there's going to be too many decks that can do some of the win cons like Count on Luck, but I think the value, if you can play triple red and sealed somehow, is that would be quite fun. A lot of red cards care about cycling, and again, it's just pure value, right? You either get the card, or when you don't need it, you cycle it away and you get something that's hopefully more relevant, right? And then hopefully you can reclaim the value back from your grave somehow. But red lending itself to cycling is kind of cool. There's some nice top end win cons that you can combo with it, and I'd be interested to see some people make push the limit work. I think it can work in this set with all the cycling, but we'll see if it's too slow or not. But seems like a fun thing to try. We have a nice instance to support the red aggression. Make sure that you're attacking in and not losing your creatures or vehicles. But by and large, red just has some very nice, aggressively statted creatures with some really nice removal to back it up. The last color we need to cover is green. Green's just big in this set. Like, I don't really have too much more to say except for it's just really big. like obnoxiously large stats. Power toughness is huge. The vehicles are great. They're big too. They're big vehicles that make other things larger. So, what can you say? There's some ramp, there's some big creatures, there's a little bit of fixing, and, there's some ways to cheat on creatures as well. Some fun, extra fun win cons. There's also just great value 1-drops in green, which, isn't always the case, but in this set there are. Like, Defend the Rider is a card. Let me tell you, that is a card. I like that card a lot. There's 2-drops. They're just okay. You trade them off early, or they just win the game late because they have so much value on them. Fantastic. Great curve out creatures at 3-drop or with exhaust abilities or 2-drops that attack in. So green just seems pretty decently statted throughout the curve with just large creatures. Don't sleep on Fang Druid Summoner. There are quite a few vanilla creatures it can fetch, and some are rather large. So a 4-mana 2/4 that has reach, which is relevant in this set, that also basically tutors or recurs one of your largest creatures, is definitely good value. There is a heavy self-mill theme within green, and Rise from the Wreck is an absolutely incredible card. If you build around Rise from the Wreck, you're going to get 4 cards back from your grave, which is really insane for the low cost of 3 mana. So I think, the self-mill strategy is extremely viable in green. Green has a few combat tricks as always, and a couple of good removal spells that rely on creatures. So yeah, green just looks really good at supporting a wide variety of deck and win cons, and also just kind of giving you a little bit of extra muscle. Moving on to artifacts and colorless spells. As always, you have some filler, which is fine. In sealed, there's nothing wrong with playing filler artifacts. Some are quite good. They don't read amazing, but they're not bad. Certainly cards I would put in my deck. And then there's some fun win cons even in the artifacts. So an interesting Planeswalker, for instance, and some artifacts that really kind of amplify your cycling or help enable you be able to play 3 colors easier. Just a good array of artifacts that can slot into decks as needed. I think again, cycling is always going to be good. So even if one of these cards has to be your 23rd, that's fine. Let's discuss the lands for a second, specifically Night Market. I think this land's fantastic. Might be the best land in the whole set, and it's at common. Any land that has cycling on it is fantastic. If I was playing a monocolor deck, I would still run Night Market. So it doesn't matter if you're playing 1 color, 2 colors, 3 colors, 5 colors. Night Market should probably be in your deck no matter what. The raceways, however, that add colorless mana, I think that has a real impact in the set, and that they have great endgame value. But be careful, because if you're running an aggressive deck, the last thing you want to do is not be able to curve out because you didn't hit your 2 colors and you're not dropping your 2-drop on turn. So I think there is a real risk to colorless mana, even with good abilities. Just be mindful of that. The roads, the pilot roads that sacrifice later and you make a pilot, fantastic. Even if you don't have a lot of mounts or vehicles, I think it's fairly likely that on turn 1, not too many decks have 1-drops that absolutely need to hit the board on turn 1. If you are playing a very low curve, maybe these aren't for you, but most decks in sealed will be able to afford at least 1 road in their deck. There's a common run of dual lands. Enter tapped, you gain 1 life. They're fine. I just don't expect you to open too many of them in your seal pool, and for them to be colors you need is probably even less likely, so, hopefully they match up. Same with the rare lands. They're fine. If you open them, hopefully you're in those colors. If not, well, they won't be the best opens you could have had then. Let's move on to multicolor archetypes and what you can do with cards when you start mixing these colors together. White and blue combine for a heavy artifact theme. There's some affinity artifact payouts. The uncommons are good signposts, and the rare and mythic are also good cards. So everything here is overall very solid. Expect to play a flying win con with your artifacts. Similarly, blue-red is also a heavy artifact build, but also leans into pirates. The signposts are quite good. Captain Howler is quite the card. Remember that cycling happens at instant speed, so this is a combat trick with cycling cards as well as a nicely statted creature. Blue-red will be an aggressively slanted pirate build with artifacts and cycling in this set. Green-blue is an exhaust theme that ramps, but I actually just think it's a Sabsunin archetype. So if you open this god, it's probably worth playing green-blue or splashing it at least. There is some ramp. The uncommons are fine. They have exhaust payouts and enablers. I really think the red-green exhaust is going to overshadow the green-blue exhaust decks, but there's no reason why you can't play Teamer, especially in sealed, and if maybe you have loot or some of the other 3-color payouts. Moving into red-green, straight away, it's the beatdown exhaust deck, so the green-blue one's the ramp, red-green's more of the beatdown, try and kill you quicker. Some good uncommons for sure, and the mythic is a bomb. The rare is okay. But yeah, I think green and red definitely get their power from the single-colored cards more than the multicolored cards in general. And yeah, there's some good ones there. So something to consider. Let's just move straight into Boros Beats. Red-white. Boros cares a lot about mounts and vehicles, which are two things that don't normally get associated with being an aggressive deck. They can be slower mechanics, but they did a good job of making sure that the ETBs on the Boros vehicles are really strong and that they enable your other creatures on board to attack in when you curve out to them. So overall, just really good cards. The uncommons seem solid, giving you benefits for playing a card that maybe doesn't attack in that turn. Colladin kind of solves the whole slow down problem if it's on the board. Mounts getting saddled, vehicles becoming artifact creatures, and they all have haste is quite the ability. So look out for that card if you want to go with an aggressive mount and vehicle build. And just like loot kind of being the glue for a reason to go into Teamer, Samut has the reason to go into Naya. I think there's no reason why you can't combine Boros vehicles with some of the better Gruul vehicles. There's a lot of cross synergy there, and you can even jump into green-white. Green-white has a heavier emphasis on mounts, but you can also play a lot of vehicles in this build. There's nothing wrong with that, but really the uncommon signposts are great creatures and kind of the draw of it, right? A 3-mana 3/4 that can be an anthem for your whole board is a card. And Lagarin is also quite good if it can even attack once without penalty. It can start just buffing up your entire board and making everything too large. So some good value cards in green-white if you want to focus on vehicles and mounts. All right, moving on to white-black. The uncommons are solid and have really good value. There's a zombie theme in these colors, and it really does focus heavily on recursion. So looking to bring back your artifacts, bring back your creatures from the graveyard, recast them, and just outvalue your opponent that way. You're going to be playing a controlling deck here. My only problem with the archetype as a whole is that the mythic and rare are finicky at best. They are going to be very difficult to fully maximize in limited, especially in sealed. So I think a lot of times you're going to be pulled into white-black because you have good white cards and good black cards, and they make sense to play together, not necessarily because you opened a mythic that you want to try and make work that's quite difficult. Not only that, but I feel like in order to make this mythic work, you're going to be looking more towards Abzan and comboing it with more cards that have repeated exile from grave to maximize your triggers and your drawing cards. That, or you could just open the mythic and the rare together in the same pool. It can happen. So this is definitely a combo. Speaking of graveyard value and recursion, black-green has a lot of good cards that get value out of your grave and also enable it with Surveil. So I like the signposts, and the rares are quite nice as well. So just some overall good cards in these colors. I think black and green in sealed is highly likely to see some play just because the recursion value is so good with the cycling that it has a natural fit. Even if your seal pool is pulled in a lot of different directions, it has some payouts that you might be interested in. I think Soul Tie is a color that people will go into in order to get more card draw, more value. Maybe some of the best value in the entire set. Moving into black-red, the uncommons are incredible. Some of the better uncommons. The rare and mythic are very good, incredible cards as well. So there's nothing to complain about here. I think it is a well-supported archetype with start your engines, going for max speed, and then having nice payouts. It certainly enables max speed really well. Lastly, I want to cover blue-black in that it has individually a card I love. I mean, Haunted Hellride is quite the card, but it lacks some of the better support in general for really big reasons why you'd be drawn into playing blue-black specifically. I think most of the time if you end up there, you're going to have good blue cards and good black cards that you want to play together, not because you opened a really fantastic signpost or something in that color. Splashable, for sure, for some of these cards. I think if you do end up there, you're going to have a reason why you want to have max speed, but for some reason your pool doesn't have the red to get you there, so you're going to have to go with blue flyers to get your black to max speed or something along those lines. And finally, a few general words of advice for the set. Be careful that you don't play too many cards that don't impact the board. I mean, my worst nightmare is having like 5 vehicles on the board and nothing to crew it, right? So just make sure you have a good ratio of enablers and payouts no matter what. Make sure you're focusing on value in the set. I think it's going to be so easy to lose because somebody drew more cards than you or they recurred more things from their grave than you. And I think value will dictate a lot of wins in sealed especially. So look for the value. Like even exhaust. Having mana sinks for you to do on turns where you have no cards left in hand, that is value. So make sure you're just maximizing your value. If you're aggressive, be fast. Don't fall in this weird zone because I think once you get to the late game in the set, if you're not drawing 2 cards, if you're not bringing back creatures from your grave and not replaying your best cards, if you're not cycling towards your biggest bombs in your seal pool, your opponent certainly will be, and you could fall behind because of that. So I think there is a lot of pressure to close out games faster if you don't have a lot of good cards in your pool or you're not drawing towards your bombs or have good value late game. But yeah, it should be fun. I hope you join me for the live stream on the 5th. If you're still watching this, please hit the like button. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm a small channel still, so I actually answer my comments. But anyway, yeah, take care. Have fun at your pre-release.